You're listening to the Verdigris podcast with Rae and Andi. I'm Andi.
And I'm Rae.
And we have a website. It's verdigrispodcast.org. We are also on Instagram and on Facebook. And we also have merch. So if you'd like to get any of the little extras or the merch, please check out verdigrispodcast.org. Hi, Rae.
Hi, Andi. It's so good to be back with you.
I know, it's so good to be back on the podcast. I realize that, we stay on the schedule for publishing the podcast, but we did record our episodes, our summer episodes, a bit early to allow us to travel. And then we assembled all those postcards, from our travels. So we haven't actually seen each other very much over the last month and a half. And so it feels great to be back in the podcast booth talking about preservation stuff.
It does. I haven't been able to scratch that itch in a while, so I'm pretty excited.
And we're talking about some more, let's say, serious or consequential, maybe is the word. I don't know. I think postcards are very consequential, but we're talking this time about an issue that is ongoing and has been ongoing in the built environment, which is visual pollution.
Yeah, and I think in a way this has a lot more consequence for people, even if they don't know about it, right? Postcards, you can participate or not, but everybody is impacted by what we're going to be talking about today in various ways. So,
indeed. And I have some very complex feelings about visual pollution. I think you do as well. And we tried hard not to talk about this before this recording.
It's so hard.
It's really hard. We're not good at poker. Poker faces are not our strengths. Neither one of us really.
No.
We both kind of wear our heart on our sleeve a little bit. But so what got us to talk about this, to think about this, is our producer, Gwenaëlle, who is the reason that we even have a podcast. As some of you might know, if you're longtime listeners, Rae and I just, talk to each other every day, mostly about work things and, life. And it was Gwenaëlle who eventually was like, no, but seriously, just record yourselves, you dorks. Just get it done.
Yeah, we talked a big game about doing it for a while, but yeah.
By a while, 2 years, I think.
Was it that long?
I think it was. So Gwenaëlle got us to do this and has since been our indefatigable producer and gives us lots of feedback and lots of things to aim for, some of which we get to and some of which admittedly are still on the to-do list. We're, middle-aged academics. It takes us a while.
We have other things on the to-do list too, so it's okay,
Yeah. One thing at a time. So anyway, but Gwenaëlle is a multifaceted artist and director and producer and editor and has done all sorts of awesome stuff, animator. And among the work that she has done over the years, she did make a movie in the early 2000s. Let me find the exact date.
I looked up her website, and I think it was released in 2011, called This Space Available.
Exactly. I watched it in 2011, of course, when it came out. And then, it was just part of my library and part of my, background resource for, all sorts of stuff that you and I do that is related. And then recently I was talking to Gwenaëlle, and it occurred to me and to her that, well, I should watch this again and see kind of what's the same, what's changed, how the movie is still relevant today. And it is still very relevant today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were, so I watched it. Excuse me. I've watched it twice in the past couple of months because I had never seen it before. And so I watched it once, and then Andi and I watched it together, which was really hard because I kept wanting to say things. So instead, I just...
It was like meaningful eye contact and then, no, look away.
But yeah, I mean, it's a very powerful film, and I think really visually engaging, which for a topic about visual pollution, I think is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts, and I'm excited to use this as kind of our launching point to talk about what it means in our built environment writ large.
Exactly. I mean, I think what I love the most about the movie is that it asks people in the advertising field about visual pollution. And the thing is, I mean, you're an architect, I'm an urban designer. We're both very much attuned to the built environment and its aesthetics, but we come from a totally different perspective, a kind of the opposite perspective, really. And we can listeners, you can't see her, but Rae is shrugging, nodding, and then disagreeing.
Yeah,
so
maybe I think there's a lot more nuance to it, honestly.
Exactly. And so I think it's been really fun to watch this and to think about how visual pollution affects us and how visual pollution is perceived by different professions related to our built environment, right? The ones who create the advertising, the ones who are in some cases fighting against the advertising, but also just designers who are trying to get the built environment to do other things like, be navigable and that kind of stuff.
I think also what I really responded to was the fact that they weren't just talking about advertising, but it got into these bigger questions about art. And
Absolutely.
What is that? Who has the ability to change and contribute to what our visual environment looks like?
Absolutely. So first of all, we will of course have the movie information linked on the website. Again, it's called This Space Available. It's from 2011. But before we kind of go deep into the theory, let's just start with what is visual pollution,
Yeah.
right? That's probably important. What is the definition of visual pollution?
Well, that's actually a huge question.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why there's a whole movie about it. So I think we each have our own definition. So I'll try to stumble through what I think visual pollution is. To me, visual pollution is the pervasive clutter that just keeps getting added layer upon layer to our built environment. And it's mostly around consumerism, although I will say that there's a lot of pollution that's maybe not consumerism either.
That is something that I want to talk about as well.
But so, yeah, to me, it's this just kind of layer upon layer that starts to obscure the design and the environment. And, I'm fine with ads. I like billboards, but there's a point at which they become obtrusive. And so I think so I'm struggling because I don't know how we define pollution.
I mean, I think it's a difficult definition because it's not like air pollution or water pollution, because air pollution is just objectively bad and you can measure it with objective data, right? You can say there's so many particles in the air, and so this is a yellow alert day or a red alert day, or hey, the water is really polluted, you can't fish here because then you'll grow a third eye. So that kind of thing, that's pretty obvious. But visual pollution is much harder because visual pollution is inherently based on aesthetics, and so it is inherently subjective. There is no such thing as the objective measurement of visual pollution, with one exception, I think, which is whether there's light pollution, right? That you can measure, right?
Yeah.
So if you have something like, all these lights at night so that you can't see the stars, that is very objectively measurable. And in fact, I remember when I used to live in Vermont, one of the things that really struck me was that when I would drive back from Rhode Island on Sunday nights very late. I would approach Burlington, and from about 50 miles away, I could see the glow of the city. And it's not a big city, Burlington.
Yeah.
But Vermont has so little light pollution that when you approach a place with light pollution, you're like, oh, wow, okay, that's definitely visible. There's no question. But I think visual pollution, for most things, and for instance, in the movie, This Space Available, is really more looking at what, as you said, that visual clutter and kind of stealing your eyeballs, in a sense, stealing your attention, mostly for advertising. I mean, the movie focused on advertising, although, as you noted, it's not just advertising, and we'll get back to that in a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could actually objectively measure it. I think what we can't objectively define is when it's too much, right? Like we've been able to do science to say, okay, because all water has some pollution in it, right? But we've been able to scientifically say, well, this much ends up killing these things, and this much is bad for, disease or whatever. But I don't think we've been able to find that line in terms of this kind of stuff when it has negative consequences to society. But we could objectively say, like, there's this many square feet or this many square, centimeters of advertising and visual things in our environment. And, we could put numbers on that. I think the problem is we can't figure out how much is too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's how much is too much, and also what the line between art and advertising is. I mean, I think it's a tough question and very nuanced, right? One of the things that really strikes me about this whole issue is that, by definition, these kinds of problems can only be resolved at the local level, right? Through local regulations, really. Even if you're looking at something like, a country that has a lot of top-down power, even then, it's going to be kind of localized depending on, how wide a street is, how tall the buildings are, how big you could make those billboards, et cetera. And so as a result, every place is going to be different. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. And, that's also part of the complexity here is, first of all, how do you define visual pollution? And, well, that's hard and is going to be pretty individualized, I think. But also, if you want to try to control visual pollution, how do you do that? And the answer is going to have to be, extremely local. You can't just come up with an overarching rule. That doesn't work very well.
Right, because it'll inherently exclude things in places that another place hadn't thought about, right? I mean, I think that's why it's so local.
Yeah. So I don't know where we want to go next in our talk. There's so much to talk about. We could talk about it from a historical perspective. We can start from different places in the world. What do you think, Rae?
Let's start with the historical perspective. I did some wikiing, so about billboards in particular.
Well, so this is where my immediate thought, though, when I was watching the film again, was, oh man, but it's not just billboards. Like that was the first thing that popped into my head, because the control of so-called visual pollution really started, as many things did, in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, which is when urbanization, really took off, when people really started concentrating in cities and people really started industrialization, right? So therefore, more people in a closer environment and more consumers. I mean, that's the other part of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, specialization means that then you need a market for what you specialize in. And also there's, when I was looking at billboards, we have to think about the mechanization of creating advertising, right?
Exactly.
So it's different if everybody had to paint their own sign. Once you can have lithographs and quickly produced posters, then suddenly you have a way to kind of have a message exponentially expanded, but also clutter things.
Right. And so in the 19th century, this is when posters, which were usually, made on paper and then, glued onto buildings, really took off. And this is when the Morris columns became a thing in Paris. So this was like my first thought that popped into my head when I was watching this, was the Morris columns, which, dear listeners, you almost definitely know what they are. So think of Paris, think of accordion music and a baguette and the striped shirt, which is called a marinière in French, and someone on a bicycle wearing a beret. Okay, are you there? Can you hear it?
I am so there. Yeah.
And what you'll see on many street corners in Paris is a column that is covered with like a kind of oniony looking dome. It's made of cast iron. It's painted that very Paris green, that dark green color. And all around the columns may be like 10 feet tall, maybe something like that. And all around it are posters for different things. Shows usually, think of all those Art Nouveau style posters and, think of Toulouse-Lautrec and think of Montmartre, and you have it in your head. Of course, we will post pictures online. You can also look them up. Again, they're called Morris columns.
I'll be honest. When Andi said, "Do you know Morris columns?" and I've been to Paris once, and I thought, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." She showed me pictures, like, "Oh, of course, yeah." so dear listener, you've probably seen them.
Yeah, you definitely know what they are. But point is, so in Paris in the 1860s, people were complaining about all these posters all over the city, like being stuck on buildings. And one thing that they did on government buildings is that they developed a law that you can no longer post on government buildings, which, by the way, that law is posted on government buildings, which I love it. But also, you got that proliferation of Morris columns, and those posters went on that. I don't think of that as visual pollution. Number one, I think of that the columns themselves as beautiful pieces of street furniture, right? A street furniture would be anything, that you use in the street, like a bench or a trash can or a lamppost, right? So a Morris column is another piece of street furniture. But also, if we think of those posters, right, for things like the Moulin Rouge, I mean, today, those things are in museums, like literally. They're in museums and they're considered art, not even pop art, high art. So, yeah, I think it really emphasizes that people were thinking about things like visual pollution, 150, 160 years ago, but also that, one person's visual pollution is another person's art, even if it is commercial.
Yeah, what I would argue is the reason that those are not visual pollution is because pollution is insidious. The movie argues, it's the insidiousness of it. Like, you're always being marketed to, it's always bombarding you. And I feel like it's a choice, right? Like,
right.
That the advertising is there and you can look at it or not. And I would say that, American colleges and maybe even high schools for a long time kind of adopted that same thing, right? Like, I remember when I went to college and there were these like post-up boards and you were only allowed to put, stuff there. And if you stuck it to trees or anywhere else, they would rip it down, but you could put it specifically on
one location.
Yes. And I think to me, that's kind of this line of pollution versus, hey, you want to be marketed to, you want to know what's going on, you want to know what to buy, you know where to go, as opposed to it's sort of like on our phones, right? Where we're always being bombarded with stupid ads for things that you're like, I just looked at that once and now I'm getting 12,000 things about it. And I think that's kind of the line.
Yeah. At that same time, though, in history, in the 1860s, 1870s, actually a little bit later, is when the other side of visual pollution, the one that is not mentioned in the film because the film is focused on advertising, but the other aspect of visual pollution that was a big, big, big talking point at the turn of the 20th century, which is the proliferation of things like electric lines and phone lines and tram lines all over cities.
Yeah.
And something that we kind of forget about today in the Western world, but was a huge, huge issue at that turn of the 20th century. And I would argue this is really more what encouraged the City Beautiful movement to really take off in the US. It wasn't really advertising or controlling advertising, controlling billboards. It was really trying to control and honestly reduce the number of overhead wires all over cities. I mean, that was considered the worst of visual pollution.
Yeah. And, having lived in several cities in my adult life, often in places where we still have all of those above ground wires, you realize how in the way they can be, how dangerous they can be, and honestly, how ugly they can be. And which is why I think in pretty much the second half of the 20th century onward, we try to bury all of those utilities and keep them out of the way. They're also less safe being above ground. So all kinds of things going on there. But I hadn't really thought about all of that, the wires. Yeah.
I mean, but because to me, like, that was the visual pollution that was considered really problematic at the turn of the 20th century. And when the City Beautiful movement took off right around that same era, right after the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, that was a primary concern of City Beautiful people all around the U.S. was bury those wires. Like bury those wires, take care of empty lots in towns, put up fences, paint them, just maintenance stuff. And, honestly, ads were not even part of the conversation. And I would say, at least in that regard, the battle has been not entirely won, but I think some overhead wires can be nice, right? I like tram lines.
Yeah.
I think they can be quite attractive, but it's, but when you look at those pictures from the turn of the 20th century, especially with all the phone lines everywhere and stuff, you literally couldn't see the sky. I mean, it was wow.
Yeah. I just have to say this because when you said the Columbian Exposition, and I have something about billboards at the Columbian Exposition, and I'm just going to put this out there that I feel like the Columbian Exposition in Chicago is the built environment's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, because everything comes back to
Every time.
It always comes back to 1893.
Everything. And, that was the one moment in the development of the American built environment that really changed just about everything. And for those of you who don't know, the World Columbian Exposition in 1893 in Chicago, which was called the White City, was, hugely important for the city of Chicago. And it was open for about 6 months. During those 6 months, the equivalent of 1/3 of Americans' number of tickets were sold. I mean, obviously not 1/3 of Americans went there, but you can bet that everyone talked about it, right? That's when the first Ferris wheel
I was going to say built. There's a whole bunch of firsts. As a Squish Penny fan, I learned a lot of them because Squish Pennies were first introduced there. The Ferris wheel, beech nut gum, Wrigley's gum. I'm trying to think. I think iced tea. There's a whole bunch of Cracker Jacks. There's all kinds of things.
All sorts of stuff.
Out of it.
And I mean, at other World's Fairs, it wasn't at this one, but that Otis first unveiled his safety elevator, which allowed for skyscrapers to be built.
That was at the Crystal Palace.
Yeah. So of course, I teach a lot of Paris history, and of course, the Eiffel Tower was built for a World's Fair. So I mean, it's just nonstop. And speaking of visual pollution, when the Eiffel Tower was built in 1889 by Eiffel, it was considered horrifically bad visual pollution for the city of Paris. To the point where one famous author in Paris said that he had lunch every day in the Eiffel Tower because it was the only place in Paris he didn't have to look at it. Right? And so
that's fabulous.
Because it is in fact visible from, a lot of parts of Paris. And so, what we've considered visual pollution over the years has certainly evolved.
Yeah.
Right? And this is another issue that I really started thinking about while I was watching the film is what's advertising and what's not advertising.
Yeah.
So was the Eiffel Tower advertising? And I would argue, yes, from the beginning it was. It was named La Tour Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower, from the beginning. He financed it basically by putting his name on it, right? And this was an advertising for his engineering skill. It seems like advertising to me. What's the line between advertising and not? I mean, that's how skyscrapers were started too. Yeah. So if listeners are unaware, the first buildings that we would consider to be skyscrapers, so not just tall buildings, but the buildings with the tower, right, that really competed for the tallest building in the world, all of those buildings, those tower pieces were basically unusable. Right. So they'd have a base of the building that'd be maybe, 10 stories tall. And then they'd have the tower, like the Singer building in New York for the Singer sewing machines is a great example. Or the Woolworth building is another great example. And that tower piece was just there to be super tall.
To get bragging rights.
And they were always named the whatever company building. Now, that company didn't use the whole building. Never. It never happened, right? They would use a little bit of the building. The reason that they would have the building built is so that they could put their name on it. And in fact, the Singer building, the Woolworth building, the Chrysler building, all these buildings, you know them as that building, even if they've changed names. Right. You still know them as the whatever it was built at as building. So very effective is that visual pollution.
Right. And I think something to know about those skyscrapers is they were intentionally working with a silhouette that was distinct so that could be their brand.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, they didn't need the words. You could kind of draw the outline of it, and that's what was, but it's also a piece of art.
Absolutely. I mean, my favorite, as you know, is the American Radiator building, also in New York. And it is just, it looks like a radiator. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And it was on all their ads.
Yeah.
Right. So not only was it an ad in and of itself in the skyline, but then it was also on their ads for, all the things that they did. So, yeah, I mean, it's advertising, it's art, it's a useful building. Again, it's advertising is not a new concept. Personalizing advertising to people, that's a new concept.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the actual, use of the built environment, I mean, on our street that we have a warehouse that is a brick warehouse that, has the name painted on. And to me, like, I take pictures of that building all the time in different weather and stuff. I just think it looks beautiful.
Right. And I mean, there are people who look at the ghost signs
I love those.
On buildings all over our industrialized cities, right? Because big brick buildings are great to paint your ads on and then repaint them. And sometimes as they weather, you can get 2 and 3 layers of different eras of advertising. And now we consider those beautiful and works of art. And yet I think at the time they would have seen it as, well, it's just maybe even crass, right? It's advertising.
Exactly. So I guess some of the questions that pop up from that are like, well, what's different now with advertising?
Yeah.
And I mean, there is a qualitative and quantitative difference, I think, right? That we're just bombarded with advertising constantly in a way that we weren't before. And even more so now than in 2011, because now, I mean, I'm not proud to say it, but I'm on my phone a lot. And I mean, I see ads all day, every day, and so does everyone else. I do think that as a result, the reliance of advertisers on the built environment has reduced. I think that, the lighted billboards that are a blight. I mean, I hate digital billboards. I hate them. I think objectively those are bad, right? Much as for a lot of this, I'm like, well, there's nuance. We can talk about it. Like digital billboards, for any reason other than telling you that there's a car crash or something is just a hard no. I hate them. They're distracting. They do cause light pollution. They are, very resource intensive. They're dangerous. They're dangerous and destructive. Change my mind.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So, I mean, where is the line between the dangerous and destructive and the intriguing? And I will just put out Times Square. Yeah. So Times Square, and also the other thing that I thought about was when we shared our favorite National Register objects last winter, we both chose a sign. Yep. Not digital, but both lit. Right. And distracting in that same way of like trying to get your eyes, and they move, right? Like they have the lights that kind of go in sequence that race around the edges to get you to look at them. Exactly. So one is in Bristol at the boundary between Virginia and Tennessee, and one is in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas sign. And technically, the theater that I chose in Atlanta also has a marquee that had all of those same qualities as well. Yeah. Well, and I mean, think of the Hollywoodland sign. Yeah. I mean, again, very distinctive. All of those things are literal reasons that people go to a place, right? I mean, people go to Times Square to see Times Square. Now, I don't like Times Square for all sorts of different reasons, but not because of the advertising. the advertising's not why I don't like going there. I think there's a place, there's a time and place for these things. And I think Times Square, I mean, yes, if you go into Times Square, driving in Times Square, what the hell are you doing? Don't do that. Yeah, go, if you're going to go on foot and, watch your wallet. And don't eat anything there. Just go to an actual New York place. Don't go to a chain. But Times Square wasn't always like that. And as we're saying it, I'm like, Times Square. It was, even though it's not a building, it was an advertisement in and of itself. Absolutely. Because it was for the New York Times. Right. It was not always called Times Square, you guys. Yeah, did you know that? I did know that, but it's so ubiquitous now. I forgot. No, I mean, nobody has thought about it as
its old name, I don't think, in a while.
Yeah.
I mean, so the New York Times moved there. It was called Longacre Square before. And then the New York Times moved there. They're still right there off of Times Square. And so that's why it was called Times Square.
Right.
And also, I mean, I remember going to Times Square in the 80s when I was a kid. It was a very different vibe, very different vibe. Lots of ads, but very different vibe back then.
Yes. One of our power listeners, my brother, went to New York in the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. And yes, it was a very, very different vibe.
Not the same,
No.
not the same thing. But whether you like Times Square or not, I think that, you're not going to mistake it for another place. And
Right.
So from an urban design perspective, what we think of as, qualities that you want in a built environment are related to all sorts of different aspects of perception and environmental psychology, like the brain, right? So some of it is very subjective, based on your experience, based on your culture, and some aspects are very objective, actually, are very based on your physiology. So for instance, steps are always going to be more or less the same proportion because of the human body, right? Windows and doors are generally going to be of the same proportion because of the human body. Things like that. So those are very objective, very physiological aspects where, certain proportions will feel good for just about everybody. Whereas whether you prefer an environment that is very complex, like Times Square, or the term in urban design is usually coherent, right? Or you can think of it as just kind of homogeneous, organized, whatever the word is. Whether you like it on that side of things, that's really going to depend on all sorts of things related to how you were brought up and your experience and all these sociological and hey, did you have a nice date in one place? Or hey, were you mugged in another place? Or hey, were you lost? Any one of those things is going to have an impact on how you feel about things. And so as a result, I like to think of it as kind of a equalizer, like an old school stereo, right? Where some people really like the bass, all the way up.
Right.
And some people don't, right? Depending on the kind of music that you like, the kind of music that you listen to. And it's the same, I think, with urban design, where some people are really going to like the overwhelming Times Square-ness of it all. And some people are going to want, the mall in Washington, D.C. And there's not really a right or a wrong here. It's just that, different people.
I think the difference is that Times Square is analogous to the Morris columns in that you know what you're going to experience when you go there, and you can either experience it or not.
Yeah.
Like, you have a choice in the matter. And I think when it becomes visual pollution is when you are always bombarded without your choice of taking it in, right? I think in the 90s I went to New York and Times Square wasn't quite as chainy and everything else, and I liked it. And I went back not maybe 10 years ago, and I was like, oh, it's really changed, and I don't like it anymore. But I could make a choice,
Right.
as opposed to it being kind of absolutely everywhere all the time. Yeah, where it kind of leaked out everywhere.
Right. Well, and this is where we go back to, regulatory, the stuff that everyone likes to hear about, regulations and how you can prevent this stuff from happening.
Yay, zoning.
Zoning, exactly. So this is all zoning. Whether we're successful or not at it really depends on a few things. One thing that the movie really emphasizes, and I can't emphasize enough as well, is enforcement. Yeah, you can have zoning out the wazoo, but if you don't enforce it, it kind of doesn't matter. And enforcement kind of wanes and flows and comes back, and it really depends on all sorts of things like, municipal budgets and all sorts of other issues, but also on, honestly, how much people complain, right?
Yeah.
Is that if people complain a lot about something, then eventually, cities try to do something about it because, it's that or you don't get reelected.
Well, I mean, I think it's also coming to a consensus of, having places where, the film gets a little bit into this line of graffiti and art versus advertising. And I would say that, if you have places where graffiti, if not allowed, isn't prevented versus, where it's not allowed, you can get into this idea of we've decided as a society, right? Like, it's okay to advertise here, it's not okay to advertise here, right? Like, we don't want Notre Dame, with billboards all over it, right?
Right.
So I think that's part of regulation, is coming to this societal consensus, because then you do want to enforce things, right? As opposed to wanting to kind of
Right.
challenge those lines.
Well, and I think this is also where the limit, but also the strength of zoning comes into play, which is zoning has to be proactive. Right. One of the reasons that we end up in trouble is we don't have rules, and then the billboards go up and they're going to keep pushing and be larger and lit and all the things, right, to try to grab your eyes. And the issue is zoning regulations only affect new stuff. It's called the grandfather clause, right? So the thing that's already built there, well, then it can stay. And I mean, that's the tough part, is that you have to look ahead. And for places that do look ahead, listeners, you know the difference. Even if you don't realize it like consciously, you know the difference. I'll give you an example. The state of Vermont and the state of Maine both banned advertising billboards, like way back when. I can pull up the dates maybe. I want to say like in the 60s, maybe 80s. I don't know. It was a while ago. And so as a result, there are none there. They're just not there. And it's not an issue because there are none there. So therefore, there's not going to be any there. But if you already have billboards, then you have to justify, well, okay, why can't we build more billboards?
Or why can't we electrify them and all of that
exactly,
kind of stuff?
Exactly.
Right?
And so then you have to justify it, and you have to explain, like, well, we're not discriminating. We're not preventing you from your First Amendment rights. You can't, put that here because... Right. And with things like electronic billboards now, digital billboards, those have been added very recently. So since the movie was made, in the mid-teens, the 2000s, some rules started emerging because, hey, those electrified billboards are dangerous and we can measure that. And so therefore, it's one thing to have a billboard that's lit, like the Domino Sugar one in Baltimore, right, which is in the skyline. It's a historic, beautiful sign, actually, advertising, but I think it's cool. It's neon and, well, technically not neon because it's different colors, but
collectively we can call it neon.
A neon sign.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's one thing, but it doesn't move, and you're not going to see it while you're driving, like flashing at you. Something that while you're driving, flashing at you, that's objectively dangerous, and so therefore, you can ban that.
And it's also not just while you're driving. So I was thinking about the evolution of Chinatown in DC. And for those of you who haven't been to Chinatown in DC for, over multiple decades, you wouldn't know that for a long time it was pretty low scale. And there was this arch that Marion Barry put in the, early 1980s. And that was probably the brightest thing there. And there were lots of painted things and a little bit of neon and, nothing too exciting. And then in the 21st century, it became kind of the hot place to be, and they built this mall, and suddenly there were lots more shops and lots more advertising. And then they put in lots of those electronic billboards. And it was actually disturbing people who bought condos there, like expensive condos, because they're flashing in their condos all night. So it's not just the drivers, but it's affecting like people's quality of life just to like exist there. And I think that's something nobody anticipated, how impactful that could be.
Right. And this is where, again, those regulations can come in if you can show this is objectively a negative.
Right.
For stuff that is more kind of, people just don't like it, that's a lot harder. Yeah. And this is where, in terms of zoning tools, it's all about being able to either justify the public good or being able to somehow control the way that it works. So let me give you a couple of examples. We live in a historic downtown, and we have very strict zoning regulations about our signage here. And this is because the historic downtown wants to keep looking historic. And so to do that, you can't have, the golden arches and stuff everywhere. It's just going to look like every other place in America. The thing that urban designers really emphasize more than those physiological aspects. I mean, the physiological aspects are important, but again, a stair that's well designed is going to be a stair that's well designed the world over. However, what really changes is sense of place. Right. That sense of you are in this location and not somewhere else. You are in a place that has an identity. And to do that, that means the signage also needs to be individualized for that place. In places like our small town, the rules for signs are extremely strict and people have to follow them. And there is tons of enforcement because this has an impact on, how many tourists show up and how viable this place is economically into the future.
But I would also argue two things. First of all, yes, it's very strict. However, there's a lot of freedom. They don't tell you what font to use. They don't tell you what color to use. It's strict in terms of the size that you're allowed to use, but you can personalize it and you can make it individualized. It's regulated.
It has to be front lit, not backlit.
Right.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah. So backlit being those kind of plastic plexiglass kind of signs, right, that glow from within. You're not allowed to have those. There are a couple of grandfathered signs that are neon, and then nothing else neon is allowed to be in downtown. But they actually give a lot of freedom, like the size
Absolutely.
and the materials. But, you can do a lot with that. And I think that's where the regulation is good. And then the second thing is it's consensus, right? Because the other merchants will actually say, hey, that sign's not okay. And not just because it's not a tattletale. It's hey, this isn't fitting in with how we are all collectively deciding we want to do business, right? And so they will be the ones to tell their fellow merchant, like, no, you can't do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that the downtown remains looking like a downtown and not just whatever place.
But it also changes.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. Like, people think that those strict regulations mean it never changes or it's artificial feeling, and actually there's a lot of fun change, I would say.
I would even say, the advantage to something like this is that as opposed to if you're designing for, strip mall out in the sprawl and it's all of the big box stores or whatever and all the signs are identical, here, almost all the signs are made to order. It's some person who's hey, I'm going to get paid however much money to make this one sign and really design the identity of this mom and pop store. I mean, I think it's way more individualized.
Although I will tell you that I know of some new stores that moved into Central Park, which is kind of our big strip mall area here in Fredericksburg. And they didn't realize that there were actually restrictions on how much of their front window they were allowed to cover and everything else. So just because you're out in the sprawl doesn't actually mean that anything goes. They have a lot of
zoning
rules.
is still a thing, you guys. You got to follow zoning regulations. So, and that brings me to the other half of this. So on the one side, it's, hey, you can put in zoning rules that say you're limited to using this, or you have to, it has to be this size, or it has to be, whatever. And those are going to be at the local level. It can be as big in the U.S. as the state level, right? But that's it. But the other side of this is, you can try to use advertising for good too. And I know the city of Paris does this now, where they have to renovate a lot of things, and when they do that, they sell the rights to that facade during the work. So while all the scaffolding is up and all the art is hidden anyway, well, you're going to have some advertising. And, I was in Paris this summer with a bunch of students, and on day 2, we met at the St. Michael's fountain, Fontaine Saint-Michel in Paris, which shows St. Michael defeating the dragon. And it's very cool and it's gorgeous. And it's made of 15 different kinds of marble. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous fountain. Anyway, we get there and it's entirely covered with an ad. And the students were super bummed. I was also super bummed for a quarter of a second. And then it was no, this is actually great, because this money that is being made, the rights of putting up an ad on the scaffolding that was sold to whatever luxury brand, all that money is going directly to preserving this fountain, to making it look good for generations to come. And yeah, it sucks that we go to Paris and for a year, for 2 years, or however long it's going to be covered, it's going to be covered. And that's a disappointment. But it also means that it will then be uncovered and then look really good because in part of the money that was made from those advertising expenditures. So I think there's ways to make it less upsetting.
Yeah, I was actually just madly Googling while you were saying that because it made me think of when the Washington Monument had scaffolding on it. And they tried to make the scaffolding was put up because they had to do a major renovation and they had an architect, a named architect Michael Graves, design it. But I was pretty sure that it actually had corporate sponsors. And so I was trying to find where they were because they didn't put the sponsors big, although they could have, right?
Right.
So they kind of underplayed that, but the sponsors got a lot of play out of this. Like, we helped do this because we wanted to save this building. And I think that's
Absolutely.
there's a really great balance between this idea of like, we have to advertise, but we also have to maintain our, our monuments and our things that we really like. And so it's okay to advertise sometimes, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, when something has to be covered in scaffolding, does it matter?
right.
Like, does it hurt that bad to have some like brand, advertised on that thing while it's being preserved? Maybe there's some things where it's inappropriate. At the Washington Monument maybe. But a fountain or the Opera House in Paris the front facade was also being renovated while we were there. Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Cover it up. If it's going to be covered anyway by scaffolding, why not have an ad? And in front of it, there was another sign that said on the side and smaller, but it said, by law, this, the money made from this has to go to the actual preservation of this monument. And it also then, they also had on those scaffolds they had some information about the preservation process too. So like it informed the public like, hey, by looking at this, yeah, it sucks and, you'd rather look at the monument, but this is what it's doing.
Right.
And I think in a weird way, I think it gives people their agency back, right? It's like, oh, well, this isn't what your eyeballs wanted to see, but, it's for a good cause. It's not.
Right.
It's not because, we just sold out.
Well, in the film, actually, it showed large-scale scaffolding and ads in Venice, which I had never seen. And Venice has, the canals, but those are very narrow. And so the ads are kind of this all-encompassing. It's like you've dived into an ad. But I really liked the fact that it was the same kind of thing where they were saying it's so expensive to maintain these buildings, and yet this is a way that they can do that, and they make that explicit, which I thought was really pretty cool.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about preservation. I don't know if you've seen this film, but over the summer we watched a film, and I was thinking about this in connection. So we watched a film called 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
I have heard of that movie, but I haven't seen it.
Okay, so it's a 2017 film with Frances McDormand. I'll be honest, that's why I wanted to watch it, because I just adore her.
Of course.
And Woody Harrelson. And, not to give too much away, but the whole idea is that she has a daughter who's murdered, and she doesn't think that the local police have done their due diligence in trying to figure out how it happened and who killed her. And so she takes basically all of her savings and she buys 3 billboards to kind of put them on the spot.
Yeah.
And what is amazing about it is, it's really contentious and, dark, as you can probably imagine, but also this idea of what putting something on the landscape does to the conversation in town, right? Mm-hmm. How it affects her son, how it affects how everybody interacts with her, how it impacts the police. It gets really intense, but it's this whole point of like, the landscape matters. These billboards matter. Like, on some level, I kind of like, billboards, whatever, right? You can ignore them. But this was a really intense way of kind of confronting something. So in some ways, doing some good, right? Like bringing a conversation. And so maybe sometimes pollution is a way to get people
to pay attention
to things.
What I kept thinking of was 2 science fiction movies in particular that discuss this. One, which is discussed in this space available, which is Blade Runner, which is one of my, if not my favorite movie of all time.
It's a classic, so yeah.
And is architecturally, design-wise, like a freaking master. I mean, I can't even emphasize how incredible that movie is. It is gorgeous, start to finish.
I haven't seen it in a while, and I saw the clips, and I was like, "Oh, I need to watch it."
It's meant to be dystopian, right? Yeah. It is meant to be dark and dystopian and bad, and the whole time, all I can think of is, "Oh, it's so pretty, it's so pretty, it's so pretty, it's so pretty." Like the ads, I don't care. It's so pretty, it's so pretty. So that one, and also the other one that then occurred to me as well was Back to the Future 2, which, you know, you're meant to see it and think, "Oh, the future's cool but problematic." You know, there's the hoverboards and all that stuff, which, I mean, kind of happened. So that's kind of weird. But anyway, but all I could think when I was a kid, when I saw this movie the first time, was like, oh my God, this is freaking amazing. Everything about it's amazing. Jaws 12 or whatever the heck they're on, like, which again, not such science fiction anyway. But it's all amazing, you know? And so, yeah, advertising, it's very hard to say where that line is between this is okay and this is not okay. And, you know, I think the big difference in the US right now, as opposed to 2011, is that I don't think that battle is primarily fought in the built environment anymore. I think that battle is primarily fought now on our phones, tablets, computers, you know, whatever.
Because that's where our eyeballs are.
Because that's where our eyeballs are, yeah. Exactly. And when I was thinking of the danger of people driving and the distraction of those lit billboards, I mean, now I think, man, it's so quaint to think of that as the risk, because I'll walk in town and I like to play this game, which is don't play this game. It's very depressing, which is when I'm waiting at a stoplight, I like to look at drivers and see how many of them are looking at their cell phones.
Yeah, if you want to be depressed, you should definitely.
Don't actually do this because you'll want to cry. And the answer is, you know, the vast majority of them.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think, you know, much as I would love to say, oh, let's get rid of lit billboards and the problem solved. Like, no, we have lit billboards in our cars. And we're bombarded with even more ads just on our own devices. I do think that has resulted in fewer, like, you know, lit billboards. I really do think so.
Yeah.
And, yes, part of it's regulations, but I think part of it is advertisers are just like, well, this isn't worth it.
Yeah.
And there are billboards that I love. I could pretend that I don't, but I do. I love all the super kitschy, awful signs for south of the border.
Yeah.
They're awful and kitschy, and I love them. And I can think of other, ad items. Some of them are more objects. There's one, it's the big blue bug in Providence, Rhode Island. I believe it's a termite. And it's just this big blue bug, and it's on a roof of a building, and it's there for, some pest control company. And I mean, that's solidly in the art camp, right? Like, where you put that line, I think, is going to depend on your own, perspective. But I think that one is just solidly on the art side of the line.
Yeah, I was just up in Niagara Falls over the summer, and there's a milk bottling facility that has a milk bottle that is part of the facade, right? And it's a huge advertisement, right? But it's also beautiful and a piece of art, and it's now been converted into a hotel, so it's no longer advertising what's actually in there. So, but I was going back to thinking about, because we're on a college campus, and we have places where we're allowed to post things, and we're always trying to get students' attention. And on some level, it's advertising, right? It's not to buy things, but it's like to come to this event or to see this lecture or that kind of thing. I'm kind of in charge of getting students to come to stuff for, the Department of Preservation. And I find that there's a lot of willful indifference to all of that kind of stuff because they're so bombarded with information that a lot of the students are like, I don't know, I don't read my email. Oh, I don't, I don't look at social media. I don't look at the billboard. And, you walk past it every day. We have this bulletin board, and they just don't even notice on purpose. And I think that's maybe, to me, that's the level of pollution, is that we have so many things that are vying for our attention unintentionally, that it's really hard when there's stuff that's, I'm not trying to get them to buy anything. I'm just trying to see if they want to come to an event.
I mean, okay, counterpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that everything in the built environment, everything that is designed in the built environment to a certain extent is trying to get your eyeballs one way or another, right? So we talked, of course, in our episode on ducks about the duck and the decorated shed, which is a concept in architecture. We're not going to rehash this too much, but it's a concept in architecture that says basically a building is either a duck or a decorated shed. And a duck is a building that looks like what it does, like a building shaped like a duck that sells duck eggs. And the point of that is advertising, right? The point of that is, please stop at my duck-shaped building to buy eggs. Or a decorated shed where it's just a box, and notice the term decorated shed. It has a freaking billboard in front of it, on top of it, next to it, whatever.
Or the whole thing is a billboard.
Or the whole thing is a billboard. And in fact, that is the in the book, Learning from Las Vegas, that is exactly what it is, a thing that says eat here, right? And I mean, that is also advertising. And whether it's for commercial purposes or government purposes, right? And again, this is a concept as old as time. In French, it's called architecture parlante, architecture that speaks, right? Is the building that tells you what it is. Hey, this is a city hall. It looks like a city hall. Hey, this is a church. It looks like a church. This is what you're going to find here. This is what we're providing here. It doesn't have to be sell necessarily, but that's just everything that we look at all the time.
Right.
And this is where your brain interprets, what you see. It selects what it's going to look at and what it's not going to look at. And a lot of that stuff becomes automated. So just I'm going to say something that really shows how bad a parent I am, but my older daughter, we were at a doctor sometime when she was 3 or 2 or something. And I showed her a magazine, and she tried to swipe it, to try to get to the next page, right? Because she was so used to tablets. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, because your brain just assumes, that it's going to work a certain way, and is just going to ignore the other stuff. And I mean, that's just human nature, right?
I think that's the thing, is that where is the saturation point of there's too much, so you kind of consciously say, I don't want this communication anymore, right? Like how do we kind of walk that line between all the architecture that's telling us it's a church or it's a school or it used to be a church and now it's a bakery and all that kind of stuff. How do we kind of have that and still have space left to enjoy the environment? Because there does come a point when you're it's too much, it's too much for me. And that's an individual thing. But I do think there's a kind of a broader concept of just too much talking, too much information, too much communication.
Absolutely. And so what's the tool to control that? And I mean, to me, it's still going to be zoning. It's still going to be, case by case, locality by locality, where you have to figure out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. That means that some places are going to have tight control and some places are going to have less tight control and some places are just not even going to try at all. And you have to vote with your feet, basically.
Right.
And if you don't like the rules, then you have to get involved to either make them tighter or looser. I think what can be discouraging about all that is that, it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. You have to just constantly be on it. You have to constantly, check and enforce and also adapt as things themselves change. And it feels very Sisyphean, right? You just never get over the problem. And whenever you solve one thing, another thing pops up. And I mean, to me, while that can be discouraging, it is also what makes our built environment so important, and so it makes it so vital to take care of it and to be involved and to be engaged. And so personally, I don't think of it as discouraging. I just think of it as this, constant tending, right? And we're fine with tending natural environments. Tending a garden is considered, wonderful. So why not tending a city?
Yeah, I love things that push the boundaries, right? Like, I don't think we want to set it and forget it, because then it feels stopped, right?
Absolutely. Well, and as I said, like I'm definitely on the, I, I love brutalism, right? So I also love lots of things that are considered ugly. Like, you know, if you show me here's an example in Paris, I sound so snooty when I say this, but in Paris, the metro stop that I was at when I was a kid, it's called Saint-Jacques. It is kind of open in the middle. There's just the where you're standing waiting for the train, that's covered, but the middle's open. It's right where the train starts going underground, and the walls are stone. And when I was a kid, the walls were completely covered with graffiti, like completely. Just there was no open stone space. And back in, I want to say, the 90s, they cleaned the walls and put glass on top. So now there's no graffiti. I 100% preferred it before. 100%.
Yeah.
And there you go. I mean, like, I think I like chaos. I like visual clutter and complexity in my built environment. I don't want to look at the same thing all day. I find that very boring. And so, in my personal equalizer, I definitely prefer a lot of stuff to look at. And that means stuff that's incongruous, stuff that's ugly, stuff that's grimy. And, I think there should be a place for me too. It doesn't have to all be, the National Mall in DC.
Yeah. And I what I would say is I like the idea that we can have places that do have more and less complexity.
Exactly.
Because personally, yes, I love the grittiness. I love I love graffiti. I love, this kind of personal
Rae loves
expression.
Baltimore, you guys.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
And Baltimore has, rats.
It has grit. Good grit.
And lots of rats.
And lots of rats. Well, okay. So, whatever. But the point being that I like that industry. I like that complexity. I like the dirtiness. But I also like the fact that there are places I know that I can go that are also not far away that don't have that, right? Like the C&O Canal. There's no advertising on the C&O Canal towpath. It's not that far from DC. It's not that far from Baltimore. And so, you can walk for 185 miles or bike for 185 miles and really not see advertising or anything else, and yet be very close to society and amenities and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like, you have to drop me in the middle of a wilderness. But I like the fact that there are places where we have it and where we don't.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, again, that keeping all of that heterogeneity means having rules that are distinct and that are localized.
Yeah.
Again, it means being involved and responding to those crises when they happen. And, I think when you look at this space available, looking at the guerrilla artists of, 15 years ago and how hard they worked to kind of reclaim that space in the built environment was hugely important.
Oh, just to be clear, what happened was there were these artists who decided that there were unregulated ads and they shouldn't be there, and so they painted over them, and then in some cases actually put up pieces of art where there were advertisements. So that was what was going on.
Exactly. And what is needed in the built environment is going to change over time. So, for example, during the pandemic, a lot of it was those outside pavilions so that restaurants could stay in business. That was the priority at the time, and then trying to regulate those. And now some of them are still there, right? And they're more tightly regulated because, if you don't tightly regulate them, then you do end up with more rats, which at some point you really don't want.
Right. Or you take up the whole sidewalk
Exactly.
so that pedestrians don't have anywhere to go.
Exactly. But that, so those priorities of what you really want to try to focus on within that built environment is going to change over time. And so all this to say that we hope that you think about visual pollution. We hope that you think about what constitutes visual pollution for you.
Yeah.
Because it is incredibly personal, and where visual pollution upsets you versus where you're like, well, it's Times Square, it's going to be
Yeah.
visually polluted.
Yeah, personally, I like billboards on highways. I'll be honest. Like, when you're going 65, I feel like that's okay.
It can be very, very boring otherwise,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it, again, depends on how attractive the landscape is in that area. If it's a, beautiful forest and then there's, billboards, that's not great. If it's an industrial landscape with warehouses and stuff and their billboards, I mean,
Yeah.
isn't that what those landscapes are for, honestly?
Yeah.
And what else are they doing? So, yeah, I think it's all about figuring out how you feel about visual pollution. And then if and when there are things that you think are negative, a blight on the landscape, then get involved. And the good thing is you really don't have to do that at the, national level, or it doesn't have to be something where you think, well, how is it going to be in 100 years? Like, don't even think about that. It's more, hey, what can you do locally in the next year or 5 years? And the answer is a lot. You can do a lot, and it's all about being the squeaky wheel. You got to be loud and you got to express those thoughts, and you might find that lots and lots of people agree with you and then decide to do something about it.
I also think just the sheer thought of paying more attention is just so important. Like figuring out where your line is for what's pollution. That's been really fun for me, just inspiring. Like, what do I think is too much? What do I think is too much here versus here? Like, it's a really good exercise as you go about your daily lives, because you probably ignore a lot of things that you see all on the regular. Start to think about how you feel about those parts of your visual, experience, and the built environment and the natural environment, and what you're feeling.
Yeah. And I think that also then helps curiosity about the built environment.
Yeah.
So then you start thinking like, well, why all those power lines at the turn of the 20th century? And what does it mean to bury them? And how does that have consequences for all sorts of other things like snow days?
I was just thinking that because you mentioned our neighborhood, and we still have a lot of above ground things. And we had a snowstorm where a big portion of our neighborhood was out of power because one of those lines got overloaded with snow and fell down.
Yep. And so, those things have huge, huge consequences that maybe we don't think about on the daily, but we should.
Yeah.
And so all this to say, go out, go for a walk, look around, ask yourself questions, and then maybe contact us and we can help with those questions.
Yeah, we would love to hear your observations.
Well, thank you again, Rae. It is so good to be back.
Yeah, Andi, this has been fun. Thank you. And thank you, listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much, listeners. We hope that you enjoyed this episode as well. We will be back next month with some spooky season fun topics. And in the meantime, enjoy back to school, everyone. It's the most wonderful time of the year. I say because I have children at home. Bye, Rae.
Bye, Andi.